If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. It's Halloween in 29 days, in the spirit of Spooktober. People, tell us your scariest supernatural encounter stories. I was in the car driving with my ex-husband at night when I saw a humanoid figure in the street. It was wearing a cape with a hood, and I couldn't see the face. I told him to move the truck over because he was going to hit the person in the middle of the road. He said no one was there and kept going. He ran right into the person, and they just disappeared. This happened 13 years ago, and it still freaks me out when I think about it. When my boyfriend and I were alone in his house, we heard one or two bangs periodically. We originally thought it was just an old house thing. Until one time, after we watched a horror movie, we heard the banging again. As a joke, he called it out, saying it couldn't scare us that easily. My boyfriend is a devout atheist. I was ready to kill him because I believe in all types of paranormal and don't believe in challenging things. In response, it banged for like 6 times in a row. We immediately ran outside to see if we were being pranked or robbed, only to see that nothing was there, no footmarks. We have a more mossy, muddy yard. He chalked it up to animals, but I know in my soul it was something else. It still happens, but I made him swear that he wouldn't challenge it again. Even our friends who have heard it think we have something here, although they think it's funny and almost enjoy the unexplainableness of it. When I was 12, my mom thought it would be fun to mess with a Ouija board. She wasn't the best parent, but that's a whole other story. Long story short, it told us that someone in our family would be hit by a car. 1 year later, on Halloween night, I watched my brother step off the curb as we were jaywalking. I screamed, but it was too late. The car must have been going at least 45 miles per hour, and he flew through the air like a rag doll. I thought he was dead, but thank God that tough little sob came away with a broken spleen and a few stitches. Don't mess with Ouija boards on Halloween night. Or any night, for that matter. About 1.5 years ago, I performed the white kimono ritual. A couple of days later, I started having dreams with the spirit following me around. After a couple of weeks, the dreams stopped. A month later, I started to notice that when I would lay in bed to sleep, someone would push down on the bed and walk around my room. One night, when I woke up, I saw the spirit walking back and forth past my open bedroom door for at least a full minute. After a few weeks, it stopped. Then one morning, I was woken up at 6 a.m. by someone at my front door. I got up, walked to the door, and looked out the peephole. The spirit was at my front door, looking at the peephole as if they could tell I was on the other side of the door, and was staring at me. I turned away in disbelief or denial and looked again. It was still there. I wound up going to a Shinto shrine and getting an offita from a priest, which solved the problem. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. There are a lot of rituals out there that are fake, I've practiced for years, but this one is legit. I got lucky, because it can end much worse. Do not perform the white kimono ritual. When I was a kid, our dog went missing one night. It was already dark, and a storm was coming. My parents decided we would grab some flashlights and go look for him. We drove down the road, parked off to the side, and just started calling his name. My sister and I walked into a big field, and a lady just appeared out of nowhere. She had a dress on, and she was holding an old lantern. She asked us what we were doing. We told them we were looking for our dog. She told us to get off her property. We started to walk away, and she just disappeared right in front of us. My sister and I knew we saw a ghost. We found out later that the field we were in was an old graveyard. Most of the tombstones were knocked over or broken. To this day, nobody believes us. We know what we saw that night. My brother and I, aged 12 and 9, were in sleeping bags in a spare guest room of my aunt's. She had just moved in, and we were there to help unpack. It was well into the night, so we were asleep in the dark room. My eyes shot open because something was in the room. I didn't see it, but it felt like something was standing between my brother and me. Before I could think of what I should do next, it started shouting down at us. Guttering gibberish as loud and angry. I start screaming my head off. My aunt bursts in and yells what's going on, and my only response is to scream turn on the ducking light. Nothing was there. It was quiet. My brother was curled up in a ball at the bottom of his sleeping bag. We went back to sleep, trying to convince myself that my brother had talked in his sleep or something. We never talk about it again. Fast forward, my brother is about to leave for Marine boot camp. Having a beer and just chatting. He asks me if he can bring up a random thing that's always bugged him and proceeds to tell me about his memory of that night. According to him, having never heard my version, he describes waking up to me screaming and something that seemed to be floating above us yelling at us in some weird language he had never heard before. He said he just wanted to get that off his chest before going off to war. Well, duck is pretty much the only thing I could respond with. When I was about 12 or 13, I had a friend spend the night with me. We spent a good part of the night watching videos and telling scary stories before I offered to go make us some popcorn and some sweet tea. It's the South, a must-have. My house was relatively small, and the kitchen was conjoined with the dining room. My grandmother kept a large china plate display in the dining room, and through it, you could see the entire kitchen reflected in it. While I was pouring our tea, I glanced over at it, and in the reflection standing behind me, which didn't make sense as my grandmother kept her folded up treadmill in that spot, was the tallest woman I've ever seen with long black hair to match, no face. It scared me so bad that my legs gave out, and I screamed my friend's name. The house was dead silent, my dog didn't even come, so I scooped up the tea and popcorn and scrambled back to the bedroom. When I got in there, I was angry. She hadn't answered when I'd called out for her. I had a small house, and there was no way she didn't hear me, but she swore up and down that she didn't and was confused. When I explained what had happened and described the scary figure in the reflection, she broke down, I'm talking, sobbing, and kept saying it follows me everywhere. Needless to say, the subject was dropped, and I didn't invite her back over. I've never seen such a clear reflection like that since, and I'm just glad it went back home with her, whatever it was. In the woods near my town, there is supposed to be a witch's circle. Apparently, it was the gathering place of a coven in the 1600s. There is a local legend that talks about witches being hung there or nearby, although I don't know how true that is. Apparently the people who killed the witches left an empty rope for the devil, since the devil is supposed to be the 13th member of a coven. Apparently, if you step inside the circle, you are cursed to die. It happened to a friend of mine. She was asleep in her bed when she woke up and felt like there was an evil presence behind her. She was facing her husband. At this point, it was not so scary and pretty easy to explain, right? Well, her youngest son comes in the room, I think he is 4 or 5 years old, and he asks her for something, water, I think, but I'm afraid I don't recall for certain. She still feels this thing behind her, but she says okay, and she slides down the length of the bed and gets out of the foot of the bed. Her son is now staring into the corner where she felt his presence and says to her, Mommy, what is that thing? It has cat eyes. My friend told him he was dreaming, but according to her, he still talks about it. When she came back, the feeling and the entity, if there was one, weren't there. I was driving home, coincidentally, from band practice at the same house as in the previous story. The place is an old equestrian farm. It's not in the middle of nowhere, but the middle of nowhere is within walking distance, for sure. It should also be noted that I've lived in this area my whole life. I see deer basically every night. I've seen opossums, raccoons, cats, dogs, and foxes. It's rare in this area, but I've even seen a bear or two. I'm no park ranger, but I know when I'm seeing a deer in my headlights and when I'm not. Anyway, I was on this road about 1:30 a.m., and I saw the luminescent eyes of what I initially thought was a deer up a bank on the left side of the road. Because deer are ducking suicidal and can't be trusted not to throw themselves in front of a moving car, I slowed down. As I was about to pass it, it stood straight upright like a person and was just about as tall. I only saw it for a second or so before it took off, but it definitely did not seem to be standing on all fours and didn't have big ears or a rack like a deer. When it did turn and run, it was fast, but it didn't hop like a deer. It ran straight and low to the ground. I have kept an eye out every time I drive that road since I saw it, but I've never seen anything comparable. This one is probably very explainable, but it sure didn't look, move, or act like anything I can think of. When I was a kid, about 10, I was allowed to go trick-or-treating alone around the neighborhood with 2 friends, both my age. I was dressed as a witch or something of that nature a long time ago, so I don't quite remember. Anyway, we get to a house where a man, who was probably in his mid-40s, answers the door and says the candy is inside, and we can step in and get it. Being up to date on our stranger danger lectures, we politely declined and offered to wait outside. He looked annoyed but didn't press it and said to wait right there and shut the door. Maybe 30 seconds pass, and he flings the door open. There is a flash as he takes a picture of us and slams the door in our faces. We all ran down to the main street, stood for a second, wondering what happened, and decided to keep trick-or-treating. Luckily, nothing happened, but it scared the crap out of us. In 2004, when I was 11, my mom and dad wanted to take us on a holiday to New Zealand, but instead of staying in a hotel, they took us to a local farm where they had cabins. There were 2 cabins, one could hold 7 and the other held 4, and being a family of 5, we rented the larger one. The farm was huge, The owned land went right up to the mountains and covered a large pine tree forest, where the cabins back onto. The first time I saw this entity was when me and my sisters were walking through a track in the forest with some of the farmers' dogs. They would chase rabbits while we walked. The path wasn't too deep, and we could see the cabin through the trees. The forest was a little hilly, and when I looked up and saw the sheerness of this hill to my right, I noticed a tall, very thin figure. I could not see any details, almost as if he were standing in the way of any light. I yelled out to what I thought was one of the farmer's sons, saying that the dogs were too fat to catch any rabbits. I was doing this while still walking, but the man neither answered nor moved, so I stopped in a courteous gesture to wait for him to climb down the hill and join us, but he didn't move. I was a little embarrassed being shunned like that, so I kept walking, and when I turned to wave goodbye, Theman was no longer there. I didn't think anything of it and, resultingly, didn't mention anything of it. A few days later, my hike-loving father decided to take the 3-hour hike up one of the closest mountains. I was the only one to go with him, as my sisters decided sleeping in a warm bed was much more fun. So my father and I ventured up to the snowy peaks of this mountain, and when we reached the top, it was gorgeous, sun high and making the patches of snow sparkle. I actually have a picture my dad took of me at the top, and you can see how bright and open it was there. The reason I mention this is that, once again, as we began to descend the mountain, my automatic glance around me settled on the tall, dark figure. His features were still incredibly hidden by his almost enveloping darkness. But this wasn't the thing that made me freeze because, where he was standing, beside a small brush where my father stood, I could see that this man was probably about 8 feet tall. My foot is just under 6 feet, and this thig, which I now feel is a more accurate term, was so much taller. His body, I also recall, was unnaturally thin. I tell you what, I've heard so many stories of how someone can instantly sense danger or evil. This occurrence sent the most primal fear into me in a matter of seconds, making me burst uncontrollably into tears. My dad was worried I had injured myself, and when I said what I had seen, he, being his skeptical self, explained that I was potentially dehydrated from the walk. I really have never experienced anything like that, and every now and then I have a nightmare of the experience, being wrapped up and swallowed by this looming darkness. A few months ago, I was out on a walk with a few buddies of mine. I'll leave their real names out for privacy reasons, but I'll refer to them as Jake, Dan, and Mark. So the 4 of us were out on a walk near sunset. We were almost at the end of our walk because whenever we finish, we stop under a streetlight gathered around it. So we were smoking weed, and Mark asked, "What's that?" and pointed to the park, which we were right next to. At first, we didn't see anything and thought the weed was getting to him, so we called him on his bullshit. Then Jake says, "Wait, there is something," and we look back, even closer this time. I shit you not, a ducking wolf-like creature is slowly creeping through the park. Note how we're in the country. So seeing foxes and coyotes is common. But this thing was big. Like as big as your average 6-foot man. And even though we were high, we could see it was watching us as it walked by. We noped the duck right out of there real quick. We haven't seen it since, and I hope we never will. My friends keep saying they think it's a skinwalker, and I'm starting to believe them. There's a 12th century church in Medway, deconsecrated in the 1950s but open all hours due to the church's conservation trust. Nowadays, my team uses it as a training ground for new members, saying we've never been there before and need to check it out. But then we discovered it on the fringes of a known haunted spot we were deeply involved with and felt we really did have to check it out. So, 3 of us, a Catholic, Allah-veyan Satanist, and an eclectic neo-pagan. When you have weird hobbies, you get what you're given, pulled up outside not long after sundown and walked in. The church itself was fine. Dark, of course, and bland. The Victorians had a love of plaster and old things. But all the pews, pamphlets, and altarpieces were precisely how they should be, and there was nothing to suggest it was actively haunted in any way besides some whispering at a rear door we quickly wrote off as wind. Inspecting the outside, we found the same door had recent scorch marks too big to have been made by a lighter, but rural churches are magnets for things that go bump in the night and live in the woods, including dodgy people, so there was nothing particularly unusual about that. We moved into the graveyard, past the usual yew tree that you can always find in English graveyards, and the pagan uttered a very loud "Not today, Satan." I thought that was pretty amusing, so I wandered over and saw what she was pointing at, a grave with a monument above it, a long, stone, sepulchral monument on bricks, and a person-length hole below the monument, seemingly dug out from underneath. Not going to lie, I instantly thought I'd be in a punch-up with a white, so I kept my head on a swivel. But nothing came of it. Literally nothing. We don't know if there could be a natural explanation for that hole, though we expect there might be. We don't know if it's of any relevance to anything preternatural. We did also find a petrified rabbit with bloodshot eyes on a thorn bush later there, but, rural churches. This took place last year, at the beginning of summer. I was with my mom, headed down to my Nana's farm to visit for a weekend. For some context, she lives on a farm way back in the country, right at the foot of a mountain in rural South Carolina. It's a very rural, secluded area, so the roads are badly maintained and barely wide enough for two cars to pass one another. The houses are also spread out and set far back into the tree line from the road, so there's very little ambient light besides the headlights of a car. So my mom and I are driving along, her in the driver's seat and me in the passenger seat. It was around 11 p.m., and we're 15 minutes out from Nana's, deep in the woods, with the radio down almost to silence. We come onto this straight stretch of road in a heavily wooded area, and suddenly this blur of a creature darts out across the road, right at the edge of our headlights. It was moving pretty well, but both me and my mom were able to get a good look at it and both agreed on what we saw. It was a fairly large creature, roughly the size of a person or bigger. Neither of us could make out the head, but we both remember it appearing to have a segmented body, my mom's words, as if it were emaciated and its rib cage was poking out. The reflection of light made it hard for me to tell color, but my mom said she remembered it to be dark, and she didn't see your face or hair. It had long limbs, and as it moved across the road, it didn't run the way a dog or horse would, with all four legs. The best word to describe it would be loping, using its front limbs to pull itself along, and it was moving considerably fast. We both said something along the lines of "What the hell is that?" as it crossed in front of us. As we got up to where it had crossed, I turned to look at it just as it reached the other side of the road and out of our headlights. And I swear on my life, it stood up and ran. Not like a dog rearing on its hind legs, it was definitely bipedal. I immediately yelled that it had stood up, and we both started getting nervous. I honestly would have thought I was going insane had I not had another person in the car with me. My mom has always been a pretty level-headed person and not superstitious, but she was very nervous and made me agree to not tell my Nana about it to avoid scaring her, which made me recognize how serious this was. I should also mention that there had apparently been a series of attacks on livestock and horses in the area around the time this happened. People were saying they found wire fences ripped through and their animals attacked. I don't think any died, but if I remember correctly, there were a few horses that were severely wounded. There have been a few other strange instances in the area, but that was my creepiest experience. When I used to date my ex, there were times I stayed days at his house. Since he's at the university, he was studying for an exam. It was getting late and I was tired, so I was laying in bed watching TV, and next to me was the desktop where he was doing his studying. Long story short, I ended up falling asleep with the TV on and stuff. No problem. I started feeling a hand tickling my feet. I just kept moving it, still trying to get back to sleep. That happened 3 times. At the 4th time, I decided to open my eyes. I thought it was my ex bothering me, so I was just going to tell him to stop, but when I opened my eyes, I realized he had turned off the light and was sleeping next to me. That gave me chills, and I wondered who was grabbing my feet. I just sat there in bed hugging my knees for a while and covered myself 3 hours later to keep sleeping. When I was like 8 years old, I went camping with my aunt and cousins. We set up the tent near a river because there weren't any dangerous wild animals in the area. We lit the bonfire, and everything was going great. We were joking and roasting marshmallows. I was sitting with my back towards the water when suddenly I started to hear a woman singing something like a lullaby, but I couldn't hear a single word of the song. It creeped me out, and my aunt immediately noticed my change of mood. She asked me what was wrong, and I told them to try and listen. Everybody said the same thing. What is she saying? Nobody understood a word, and it was getting closer. We could hear her coming from the river shore, but that was impossible as the mud on that side of the river would make it too difficult to walk without slipping and falling. It wouldn't be someone on a boat, as the noise of the water would give it away. My aunt told everyone to go inside the tent and keep quiet. One of my aunts told us to stay inside, and she went to check the river shore to see if the woman was there, but there was no one to be seen, no person, no boat. She came back and told us to go to sleep, but she had to stand guard as me and my 3 cousins were basically wetting our pants out of sheer fear. So me and my friends are going airsofting in my friend's woods at night. There were 5 of us, 3 were on a team, and the other 2 had to go into the woods and set up a plan. When they were done, we went in, but we were stopped multiple times by my friend, who did not want to go in at all. He kept having a dreaded feeling the whole time. I felt the same way, but I thought it was just the feeling of being hit by pellets or something, so I ignored it. When we finally went to go in a figure properly, about 6 feet 5 inches, not skinny and not big either, ran towards us but then changed directions once all 3 of us started to shoot at it. I was in arm's reach of it. I couldn't see his face or anything, like it was blocked. Our shots did not affect him at all. His stance did not falter. Then he ran into the woods, and the other two saw him as well, and they came running back to the rest of us. We traced his steps, and they abruptly stopped in the middle of the woods, but there was no sign of him at all. It almost doesn't feel real, and I can't get him out of my head. My older sister and I had to share my room once because we had a visitor occupying hers. I slept in my bed, and she slept in an iron-framed cot that folds, and it's usually stored under my bed. We didn't bother to raise it up, so she was next to my bed but close to the floor. So I turned around in the night, and my sister's head was right there next to mine, as if she were sitting on her pillow. She was staring at me, right in the eyes, with the most hatred-filled stare I have ever seen. Never had she looked at me like that, like she wanted me dead or something. So I asked her what was wrong, and she just blinked and slid down her bed. I leaned down to the edge of my bed to see what was happening, and my sister was fast asleep, hugging her pillow, covered in blankets, nothing out of the ordinary. Two things about this. 1, the cot is old and iron-framed. It makes a lot of squeaking noise when you move even a little. Certainly, it would have been really noisy if my sister had rearranged herself so fast. 2, I told her about what had happened in the morning, and she assured me 100% that she hadn't woken up at all and that she wasn't mad at me at all. We still have no idea what happened, what I saw, why it hated me so much, and why the heck did it look exactly like my sister. It's about 1:40 a.m., and I need to run to the bathroom. As I pass the hallway, I glance at the door, and it is completely shut. I sit down, and from behind me, I can hear my mom and my younger brother talking in the front garden, and I can't make out what they're saying, being inside. I finish and wipe, but midway through, I hear the front door open. I finish and flush. The door is still open. I think it's a bit odd considering that we have cats that love shooting outside, so I peel around the doorway to see if someone is standing in the doorway. There isn't. I quickly walk outside, and I feel the very strong presence of someone walking around the side of the house, so I peel around again. No one. I get a bit scared, and third, as I was closing the door, I heard from the other side, clear as day, a scratchy voice. My mom's voice, in a way that I can only describe as being in pain without water for a week. Parched voice. It was so dry. I lock the door in panic and walk into the living room, where my mom, who I thought was outside, is fast asleep on the couch. I turn to my older brother and explain what happens, and his face pales. He explains that my younger brother had heard the same thing 20 minutes before. He says that it came from the house. It sounded like a pained, exhausted voice calling to him. It's now 2 days later, and I'm still trying to figure out what it could be. During a school camp, I was chatting away with my roommates. It was way past midnight when I saw it. The conversation was starting to die, and we were about to go to sleep when I caught a glimpse of the window. I could see other cabins, but on the veranda of one certain cabin, I could see a tall and pale figure just standing there. At first, I tried to ignore it, but I just couldn't stop looking back at it. Eventually, we all went to bed. I couldn't go to sleep because I kept thinking about that strange figure. I decided to look at it one more time before going to sleep. Big mistake. When I looked over, it was staring straight at me. I only made eye contact for a second before immediately covering myself up with a blanket and attempting to go to sleep. I think it was about 4 in the morning when I randomly woke up. The room was extremely dark, and I could barely see anything, but in a corner of the room, I could see the figure staring at me. I tried to scream, but nothing was coming out. The figure approached me and proceeded to wrap its fingers around my neck. Just then, I woke up. I looked over at the corner, and the figure was gone. I checked the time, and it was almost 4. Out of fear, I asked my best friend if we could share beds. She agreed. When I woke up, I went to brush my teeth. I almost fainted when I saw strangulation marks around my neck. Since that day, I have never told anyone about the incident because I'm scared that nobody will believe me. So I was bicycling home about an hour ago on one of the trails that goes through the city, and I came to this bridge that I've ridden under a whole bunch of times before. Now, the last few times I rode under it, I felt something kind of odd. I sensed something that made my hair stand on end and made me pedal as hard as I could to get out of there. This started a few weeks ago. But this time, I really felt something. There were alarm bells ringing in my head, and I started to panic as I went under. When I came out into the somewhat brighter street lamp light of the rest of the trail, I was really freaked out and rode on some more. Then I stopped at an intersection, looked back, and saw something behind me, probably 100 feet away, not moving. I don't know what it was, but it was vaguely human-shaped and very dark. If it had been a person, I would have been able to tell vaguely what he or she was wearing since it was right under a streetlight. It was dark, like a shadow, and the arms seemed oddly long, like down to its knees. I stared at it for probably 30 seconds and then sped the hell back home without looking back. My family has around 360 acres in northern Oklahoma that have been in our family since the land rush. Growing up, the family would meet there for Thanksgiving and Christmas, but as the family expanded, it was quickly outgrown. Nowadays, I'm about the only person that goes there, and I go there regularly to train with my firearms. I went there earlier this year and had an experience that shook me so badly. I will never go back there alone. I arrived around 2 p.m. and set up my targets, but something felt off. I use an electronic headset for hearing protection that also amplifies ambient noise, and I noticed that everything seemed to stop. No wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Just complete and total silence, which is very unusual for the area. I run my normal drills, and as the sun starts to set, things get stranger. Odd smells, like a dirty litter box and body odor, started coming around, and I noticed that the coyotes were crossing the field west of me, almost as if they were consciously avoiding entering the woods nearby. Then, I started hearing interference coming over my headset, and what sounded like disembodied voices speaking in an indiscernible language that I couldn't hear with the naked ear. Now, I'm starting to worry. I start gathering my things, and I hear what sounds like a woman's blood-curdling screams coming from the woods. I've heard mountain lions and bobcats squaring off, which we do have on the property, but this sound was neither of those things. Around the same time, I got what I can only describe as a nauseating, omnidirectional feeling of being watched, shortly followed by very distinct footsteps trudging through the foliage in the treeline approximately 30 yards from my position. I've been an avid hunter since childhood and am familiar with the noises of the woods, and the cadence of the footsteps was indicative of a large, bipedal creature, oddly human-like. It's very concerning, considering I'm in the middle of a large swath of property that's 25 miles from the nearest populated area. I pull my phone out to take video, and I start scanning the treeline with my flashlight. Standing behind a tree at the edge of the treeline was a tall, black silhouette with spindly limbs and a pale face, looking directly at me. I quickly grabbed my range bag and made a run towards my truck. I get about 50 yards from the truck, and the light post on our property, that is hooked up to county power and has never turned off in the 20 years I've been going here, suddenly cuts off. Now, I'm blindly running in the direction I believe my truck is in while I hit the unlock button on my fob to find the lights. I get in my truck, speed off, and as I'm watching in the rear view, the light post turns back on. This story is about the early 1930s. My great-grandfather lived in a small village. As he was from a poor family, having a motor vehicle was not even an option for him, so he used to travel to nearby places on horses. One day he went to meet his friend, and it got a little late by the time he was coming back. It was around evening when, while returning, he decided to take a short route through the jungle instead of going through the road, which takes almost double the time. So on the way, he saw a little goat just abandoned, sitting beside a tree. He thought that it might have lost its way and decided to bring it along and leave it out of the jungle. He got off, picked it up, and put it at the back of the horse. Just when he himself was about to sit, he noticed something weird. The horns and the feet of the goat were facing in the opposite direction. Quickly, under fear, he pushed the goat down and climbed up the horse to make a run out of the jungle. He started chanting prayer. Just as the horse started moving, he heard a female voice from behind. "Your prayer saved you today, but I don't know how you'll get away next time." As he turned back, he saw a woman standing instead of the goat, just staring at him with eyes wide open. This is a true story, so it creeps me out even though jungles like those don't exist in the modern world. The incident is really creepy. I was in high school in Northern California, and my closest friend was having a family reunion that I was invited to. Around 9 p.m., the last family had arrived. And for some reason, they didn't have their daughter with them. I literally don't know why they left her, so they asked us to get her. Now, Tizian just got his first car. And when you finally have that freedom, anything is a good excuse for a road trip. And they live 2.5 hours away. But they gave us money for gas. So we pile in the car, and we are on the way without a second thought. We've got music going and snacks. All around, just enjoying a good time. Finally, we get off the highway and find ourselves in a secluded, forested town. NBD. We find the last turn and are going down a tiny dirt road with thick forest on both sides. Eventually the radio starts to cut away a little bit, and I turn it down so we aren't just listening to static. But this little dirt road just goes on and on and on, to the point of absurdity. So me and Tizian start joking about who in the world would come out this far to build a house? Then, and this will stick with me for the rest of my life, this overpowering smell comes into the car. Copper. It's so thick that it's almost suffocating. We both retched, and it made my stomach turn. It was so heavy in the air that I felt like it could be cut with a knife. We kept going, and eventually we made it to a wooden bridge about 20 feet long. As we kept on going, the smell dissipated, and the radio came back in. We eventually made it to a clearing with about 5 houses, which we immediately started laughing about. Not only did they come all the way out here to build one house, but they built 5. In the middle of the woods. Why? We pick up his cousin, Shy, yes, this is her name. And I immediately asked her about the smell coming in. She has no clue what I'm talking about, there has never been a smell before. But she gets in the car, is about our age, and has the same taste in music. A song comes on that she likes, and she wants to turn it up. So we do. And now it's almost midnight, and we are blasting music back down the absurdly long road back the way we came. As expected, the radio starts to cut out little by little, and then the smell hits us again. Not gradually, though, more like smacking into a wall made of pennies. I immediately turn to Shy and ask again. And she is absolutely disgusted and assures us that this is not normal. But as she is saying, we come back onto that bridge. And as we are making it over, suddenly, the car stops. I turn to Tizian and ask what he's doing. It's not me. And he lifts his knee higher to show that he's stepping on the gas. And that's when I hear the terrible sound of tires not making contact with the ground. And the car starts ever so slightly lifting from the back. We all immediately look out the back window and are met with nothing but darkness. The angle we are at isn't anything extreme. Just enough to feel your weight shift. But whatever it is, it's lifting a Chevy Tahoe. Shy immediately starts screaming. And admittedly, I am freaking out a little too. And the sounds of static, a girl screaming, and the engine and tires spinning freely are getting to me. I'm frantically looking out every window, trying to assess the situation. But I just don't see anything. Then Tizian yells out in panic. And just then, suddenly, the back end drops. The car lurches forward, and we very nearly run into a tree, but thankfully Tizian regains control. We speed out of there as fast as we can, and very quickly the smell clears, and we find ourselves out of the forest and back on a paved road. When the radio came back, the mood was entirely too wrong, so I just turned it off as we drove down the lonely highway in silence. When we made it to a gas station, we immediately went to the back of the Tahoe to see a giant dent covering most of the center. And then Tizian finally broke the silence. I think I saw it. Shy then replied, I did too. I didn't see anything at all, but when I asked for information, it was clear they didn't want to talk about it. Years later, when I brought it up, one day Tizian swears he saw what looked like hooves very briefly in the side view mirror. Being a skeptic, I'm not sure I really trust him, but I also have absolutely no clue what could have lifted the back of a Tahoe. Given the hooves and copper smell, I was thinking of the Goat Man. Supposedly, there have been sightings in Texas, so I suppose California isn't a stretch. In Mexican folklore, an archetypical witch is the lechuza, or owl witch. It is said a lechuza makes a pact with Satan or other evil spirits in order to gain this ability. They are often portrayed as older women, and it is said he removes their legs and hides them while they are in their owl form. As a child, I was told legends by my maternal grandmother, who swore encounters with witches. Luckily, I wouldn't have any encounters until my adulthood. 2 years ago, I was in Mexico in my dad's hometown, a small town of maybe 9,000. Our house in Mexico is a fair bit away from the main town at the very end of a very long dirt road. To the left of the road are small traditional houses, and to the right is a deep gully or trench that was once a river. On the other side of the gully are woods. It was around the time of the town festival, which was an excuse for the adults to get drunk in the town plaza while the kids played at the fair. I opted to leave early as I was tired and didn't like drinking. I hitched a ride with someone from town who lived at the beginning of the dirt road, which meant I'd have to walk about a mile, close enough. 10 minutes into my walk, I heard what sounded like birds and assumed the birds nearby in the trees were settling down for the night. I looked at the trees, and about 10 feet up, I saw a pair of bright orange eyes staring me down. I was unnerved but pushed on and ignored it. I heard more rustling and looked back, noticing the eyes had gone, which led me to believe the bird had flown away, when suddenly I heard a voice from the bottom of the gully saying, "Hey sir, come here." I decided to ignore it, but it kept on pestering me until I snapped and walked towards the gully to tell this woman to leave me alone. I started telling her that I was in a rush to get home when I noticed something weird. She was dressed in Tarahumara, native, attire, which meant she had a long skirt, but it wasn't all the way down. This woman's ankles were missing, and she appeared to be floating. She looked at me with utter hatred in her eyes. I realized she knew that her secret was out, and I bolted for the house, hearing as a large flapping sound followed me. I looked back, and flying behind me was a huge owl with bright orange eyes. I ran into the house, but I only had a few seconds of peace before something was banging on the door, screeching inhumanly. I panicked and remembered my grandmother telling me prayer was the best defense against a witch, which I started doing, which seemingly worked as the screaming stopped. I decided to place salt in the doorways when something broke the kitchen window above the sink. Attempting to come through the window was that same owl, but this time it was gargling vaguely human words. In a panic, I took the salt I was using on the doorways and threw it at her. Immediately, it backed away from the window and perched itself on the fence, staring daggers into the window. I sat on the couch on edge all night and eventually passed out. The next morning I woke up hoping it was all a horrible dream, but upon entering the kitchen, I saw the glass from the broken window, and when I stepped outside, I saw large scratches on the front door. I walked over to the fence where this owl was perched, and on the fence and the floor surrounding it was blood. Unnerved, I started sweeping the glass out the front door when I saw her, an older native woman across the gully among the trees staring at me. Her face was covered with small cuts, as if she had been assaulted by tiny shards of glass. I knew this was here, and I stared her back down until eventually she retreated into the trees, and I never saw her again, thankfully. Every time I go back, I still place salt in the doorways and pray as soon as I enter the house. Often, in that house, I feel watched, and other people who stay report voices outside. Knowing on the roof, I know she sits in the trees, waiting until she can attack me again. Growing up in Bangor, California, I always heard the same ghost story. It became a sort of urban legend for our town of 665 people. From 2006 to 2009, our fire station was haunted. The firefighters all insisted on the presence of a wailing spirit. It would lock the firefighters in rooms alone and screech a deafening sound at the helpless workers. This lasted for years until the station workers refused to ever enter a room alone, as that is when it usually struck. In 2009, the station was shut down, and ever since, the Bangor Banshee has been heard in our hills at night. Being a local, having lived in Bangor my whole life, I had long since ignored this spirit as a tall tale, that is, until a couple of months ago. I was at a friend's house a town over and found myself driving home at 2 a.m. alone down our unlit highway. It being the start of summer, and my old Honda lacing air conditioning, I left my windows open for the drive. That's when I heard it. A scream doesn't quite sum up my feeling. It sounded so loud and inconstant, like 100 simultaneous blood-curdling screams. Behind, in front, and all around me, I believe I saw a dark figure on the side of the road in the corner of my eye, but I was so disoriented by the noise that my mind may have tricked me. In a moment of panic, I slammed the gas, and the sound dissipated after a few moments. I haven't driven on that road at night since, and I still get an eerie feeling on my commute to work each morning. So about 3 years ago, I went camping with my girlfriend, now ex, as she had always expressed interest but never had been. The spot we went to is in the Huron National Forest and is my go-to trail or camp spot as it's hidden deep in the forest and access to the trails is close and easy, for ATVs, etc. My family has been going to this spot for about 6 years, and my friends introduced me about 10 or so years ago. We went on a weekend trip, and I'm glad we didn't go any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then, around midnight, the weird stuff started to happen. At first, it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laugh never ended and got very high-pitched and sounded as it kept going. After a while, we both got kind of scared and went into the tent to try and sleep, and then that's when the laughter and noise moved up higher and then started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just suddenly stopped and then started again around 3 a.m. when it started again. The fire was going out, so I went to stoke the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on my flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something around the campsite, but I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This went on until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and that was finally when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I went to start my vehicle, and it was completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery. I made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, yet somehow the battery still died. I was able to get a jump from AAA. After that happened, I told my friend, who had shown me the campsite and also has a cabin in the same forest, roughly 25 miles away from the campsite, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about 2 incidents, one at the campsite and one at his cabin. At the campsite, he stated that one night after we had all returned from trail riding and gone to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as bioluminescent eyes, and he flashed his high-powered flashlight at them. But there was nothing there, and as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there looking right back at him. So he packed up and went right to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from a trail that leads into the woods. They stated that at the height the eyes were looking at them, whatever it was had to be 7 feet or taller. They started shooting at it with their rifles, 230/30s, and the eyes disappeared, but once they were done, they reappeared and were closer. At that point, they both freaked out and got back in the cabin, and they did not leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but we all felt very scared when these events were happening. After we all talked about it, one of the brothers thinks it's a Wendigo? I don't really know what it could be, but I haven't felt that scared since. I was living in a haunted house in my second year of university. This place had a feeling of absolute dread when we moved in. This house overlooked a ravine, and our living room was peering into it with 2 giant windows. The living room, main floor, was 10 feet above ground, and the basement led out to the ravine. We had a roommate that lasted a week down there and decided to move abruptly for no reason. My experience occurred when I was home alone cooking spaghetti on the main floor, which was an open concept. This was during the winter. It was really cold outside, and the steam from the water boiling put condensation on the windows in the living room. I was watching a cheek marathon and eating pasta. I was sitting facing the windows, and the TV was positioned in front. I then noticed something in the corner of my eye. My eyes completely bugged out when I noticed that a fresh handprint was streaked across the side of the window, leaving dripping streams of moisture as it trickled down the window. I booked out of that place and didn't sleep well for a month. I, 27-year-old female, went backpacking alone over the recent long weekend, which was 10/10 beautiful. The second night I camped at a beautiful high-altitude lake, which could also be accessed by a short 1-mile trail, so there were a few other campers and several people who were just day hiking or fishing. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting around my camp reading when a guy, mid-20s, walked by carrying a fishing pole and a small cooler. I didn't think much of it, but 5 to 10 minutes later, he doubled back and came and said hi. I said hi and went back to reading, but then, without warning, he sat down on a stump next to me. I was completely taken aback by this invasion of my space. He started asking me questions that were really just statements, but in a creepy amused tone like, "So you're just reading?" And then looked behind me and noticed my tent and said, "Oh, you're staying the night here alone, huh?" I didn't say anything in response to this in particular, but it's obvious that I am. It's hard to explain, but his vibe was just really off. I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't even really form words or tell him I was trying to be alone to get him to leave. I was honestly paralyzed. His eyes were so dead and dark, just drilling into me. I just responded with like, ahas or yep or something and just tried to pretend I was still reading. Without warning, he pulls out and cracks a beer, lights a cigarette, and just starts blowing it at me. At this point, I'm so uncomfortable and I'm just not responding. Soon another hiker wandered by, and he struck up a conversation with him, and I took the opportunity to grab my water filter and bladder and pretend to need to get water. I went to the shore and filtered some water super slowly and saw him walk away to go sit with the new guy, which made me super relieved, except that he kept looking in my direction. I came back eventually and got inside my tent, and for 20 minutes everything was fine. I had the rainfly pulled back and was watching the sunset and loosely organizing my things when he popped out from behind my tent and stood maybe 1 foot from my door, looking down at me. He didn't say anything but just started laughing really creepily or fakely again. I asked what? And his response was, "This is just really funny." I felt literally sick to my stomach and finally responded with something like, "I'm taking a nap now, so have a good night." He laughed again, but luckily left. Later, I saw him still wandering around the camp with no real purpose, still looking in my direction often. I had no service, but I wrote down his last name, at least what was written on his cooler, and where he said he was from while talking to the other hiker in my notes app just in case, and I slept with my pocket knife close. I debated leaving camp that night but ended up staying and just leaving super early in the morning in case he came back. Normally, while backpacking, I think the worst thing that could happen is that I might run into a bear or sprain an ankle, but this truly was the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the backcountry. I've always liked cemeteries, one in particular on an old back road in my little town. The graves ascend a hill, and at the top, where the hill descends, it's like a lookout, there's a pond, and it's a hilly area. It's just beautiful. I go there often, especially when I need to clear my head. I've been connected to spirits my whole life, so when I go, it's not odd that a spirit communicates with me. I quite enjoy it. I always state I'm not there to offend anyone and normally carry a crystal for protection, just as a precaution and for respect. Backstory: and setting aside my encounter, I go on a cloudy day. It was a rough one, and I needed my space, so to the cemetery I go. I do my normal entrance script. I have a path I take, but I feel drawn to the third row of graves and notice a grave I've never seen in my 2 years worth of visitation. An old grave, for that matter, in the shape of Roman numeral 3, 1 stone for 3 graves, and the only date I can make out is 1800, the year they passed. I instantly heard a male voice in a joking tone, "Pretty old, huh?" I gave a laugh and felt happy. This was a good man. I begin to follow my normal path to the top, and I get a sinking feeling to go no further. I physically couldn't go past this grave of the man. I get confused, and as I'm getting worried he is bad from the spot I normally sit to hear a deep growl. It chilled me to the core, and I heard a clear go. It was the man's voice, not ominous, protective. I quickly started back to my car, and my phone started messing up. I was horrified. I haven't been back yet. I'm convinced the male spirit I encountered protected me, and I want to speak with him more or go leave some flowers soon, but I'm unsure. When I was about 18 years old, I moved away from home for university and moved into a newly constructed apartment building. I lived with my grandmother, who was constantly away. I was alone in the apartment, and sometimes my friends or cousin would join me. There have been weird occurrences in my room and hallway linen closet. And my cousin has apparently been chased by a dark shadow once, but I just shrugged it off. Shortly after, I started seeing a weird shadow every night from the corner of my door, sort of creeping upwards but never entering my room. I told my cousin about it, who was staying with me. She just told me it was my imagination. Well, one night, after countless appearances by said shadow, which I know is called Charlie, my cousin insisted I place a Bible in my room because there is no way that it would ever enter. Around 4 a.m., I heard my door creep open, which I assumed was my cousin. Looking over, she was fast asleep, and my door was still closed. I started feeling a weird tingling sensation all over my body and a feeling of dread. I looked over my shoulder, and on my dresser, where the Bible was placed earlier, was some sort of black, shadowy figure wearing a long sort of suit, a top hat, and, I think, a cane of some sort. It was about 6 inches tall and sort of gliding towards me. I dived into my bed, woke my cousin in a panic, and it was gone. I slept with the lights on for nearly 3 years after that. One night, my mom and I decided to use the Ouija board. The goal was to try to contact her sister Barbara, who had died years ago. My dad wanted to try it, but my sister was too scared, so she went up to her room. My mom and I had used it once before to show me how, but we didn't want to do it much since she said it's dangerous and can invite bad spirits. For background, her grandmother could supposedly put the board on her lap and have the dial move on its own without touching it. My mom saw her do it once when she was little with the board on a table. Back to the night. We had sat on a couch with the board on a coffee table, and all 3 of us put our fingertips on the dial. We asked who was here. At first, it moved a little in random directions, and we had the whole stop moving it. I'm not, don't try to scare us thing people always do at first, thinking our dad was just teasing us. Then it started going to the B, but then around the number spot, then back to the B. We did it a few times, so we asked again, thinking maybe it's spelling Barbara, but then it did the same, going to B, then around O, P, or Q, then back to B. We got a bit tired and knew it wasn't Barbara, so we said goodbye, and that was it. A week later, my dad's brother Bob died in a car crash. After that night, we had a shadow figure that I had seen dart into the same wall twice, into the basement where the board was. My mom also began having nightmares about a shadow man coming out of her closet and would wake screaming often. I haven't used a board since. I am 20 years old, and me and my buddies enjoy late night walks on the trails within the various conservation areas in my region of southwestern Ontario. Late last week, we decided to check out an area called Pleasant Valley. To my knowledge, this area has a deep-rooted history with the Underground Railroad, Indigenous peoples, and the War of 1812, if I am not mistaken, given its proximity to Lake Erie. We entered the woods at about 2 a.m., and immediately upon entering, I was overcome with a bad feeling. After walking for some time, the feeling progressively worsened until we reached 2 bent trees in an X over the path. My one buddy pointed out the fact that it was bad juju to go underneath and we should just call it a night as we all felt watched. As soon as we turn around and start to head back, the entire forest seems dramatically quieter. We all hear a loud, distinctively human whistle behind us. It's almost like how you would call a dog over. There is no way anyone could have been out there at that hour, and there are no homes in close enough proximity for someone to be out and about. We all ran, and I was honestly terrified. Me and my friends are all relatively big guys, and we are all comfortable in the woods, so it takes a lot to get us running. Recently, I went on a camping trip and ended up camping in the Black Hills National Forest in SD. Nothing out of the ordinary, besides a warning of bad weather and a general uneasy feeling going in. I assumed it was just anxiety from driving all day and the fact that I haven't tent camped without a group in years. I'm outdoorsy and trusted myself, I'm extremely respectful of land, especially forests, and I was picking up garbage and burying waste when I found it. Me and my girl arrive at the site rather late, it's the last minute, and we decide to camp not too far off a dirt road in a designated camping spot with the tent and blankets in my truck. We set up the tent and watch the sun set before falling asleep in it. I have the feeling to leave my firearm locked up in my truck for some reason and decide to listen to my gut on this one. We crawl into bed and drift off to the sound of rain in the forest. I knew it was the anniversary of the Deadwood flood, but I don't pay too much attention to it. I awakened at an unknown time to the sound of the tent zipper being opened. I sit straight up and see a face of pure black staring at me in the darkness with a massive grin on its face. All I can make out are my eyes and a smile. I'm frozen in terror and blink a couple times to find it gone and the tent untouched. My girl, who was lying next to me, asks me if I'm okay, and I just say it was a nightmare, but I was okay and not to worry about me and to go back to bed. She falls asleep, and I lay staring at the rain cover, frozen in shock, for a few hours. I've had night terrors or hallucinations, but nothing like this. It was too real and too vivid to be a dream. This is her first time camping, so I decided not to tell her in fear of scaring her away from something we both discovered and enjoyed together. I taught her to leave everything better than how you found it and how to be respectful and responsible, and there were no bad intentions from either of us. I haven't paid much attention to it until tonight, after talking about it with my roommate. I took it more as a warning than a threat. I've had spiritual encounters multiple times in my life, all of which were positive and gave me guidance, but this was different. Not a single word was spoken, and I was genuinely scared for the first time. We left in a hurry with the excuse of getting on the road. I'm still freaked out. I'm mostly seeking guidance on recourses and to get opinions on what this could be.